What would you do if the very people meant to protect your neighborhood tore down your home instead? For Maurice Landry, one cabin by the lake turned into the center of a fight that exposed corruption, fraud, and power gone too far. Maurice Landry pulled off the two-lane road that wound along Caddo Lake, gravel crunching under his truck tires, expecting to see the familiar sight of his cabin's porch lights glinting through the trees. Instead, he froze. His chest tightened, his hands gripping the wheel as his eyes adjusted to what lay ahead. The cabin was gone. Not just damaged, not just vandalized, gone. Nothing but a pile of splintered wood, twisted nails, and shattered glass remained. The dock he had built with his own hands was ripped apart, boards floating at the water's edge like discarded driftwood. The porch swing where he used to sip coffee at sunrise? Buried under rubble? The land looked like a demolition crew had marched through and erased years of his sweat in a single day. Maurice stepped out of his truck, boots sinking into the dirt. The humid Louisiana air clung to his skin, but the sweat running down his back wasn't from the heat. It was from shock. He dropped to his knees and picked up a broken piece of cedar, one of the boards he had carefully stained himself just last summer. His throat tightened as he whispered to no one in particular. "Why?" The sound of footsteps on gravel pulled him back. His neighbor, Franklin Dade, a wiry man with a fishing hat pulled low, walked over cautiously. "Maurice, you didn't hear?" Franklin asked quietly. Maurice's voice cracked. "Hear what?" "The HOA. Beverly Hensley had a crew out here yesterday. Said you hadn't paid your fees. They tore it down." Maurice stared at him, disbelief mixing with rage. "Fees? I paid every damn fee. I've got the receipts. What gives them the right to do this?" Franklin shifted uncomfortably. "You know Beverly. She's been saying for months that you were behind. Folks tried to tell her to slow down, but—" He trailed off, eyes flicking to the rubble. "She wanted this lot bad, Maurice. Everybody knows it." Maurice clenched his fists, his pulse hammering in his ears. "She stole my home." Franklin raised a hand, trying to calm him. "Look, I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just telling you what I saw. She had 3 men out here with heavy equipment. By the time folks realized what was happening, it was already gone." Maurice's jaw tightened. He could feel the anger rising, but underneath it was something worse. Helplessness. This cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was years of double shifts at the plant, saving every spare dollar, skipping vacations, patching up old trucks instead of buying new ones. It was where he brought his son to fish, where his late father had sat on the porch and told stories about growing up along the Red River. And in a matter of hours, it had all been erased. That evening, Maurice drove into Shreveport to stay with his sister Adrienne. She met him at the door, worry etched across her face as soon as she saw his expression. "What happened?" she asked, pulling him inside. Maurice dropped his duffel on the floor and sat heavily on the couch. "They destroyed it. Beverly sent a crew. My cabin's gone." Adrian's eyes widened. "She what?" He nodded, bitterness in his voice. "Said I didn't pay fees. You know damn well I paid." Adrian sat beside him, her hand on his arm. "Maurice, this isn't just wrong. It's criminal. She had no legal authority to demolish your home." Maurice rubbed his temples. "What am I supposed to do? File a complaint? You know how long that'll take. By then she'll have that land sold off." From the kitchen, his cousin Reuben, visiting from Dallas, stepped in. His broad frame filled the doorway, his marshal's badge clipped to his belt. "You don't have to fight this alone," he said. Maurice looked up at him, eyes burning. "What are you saying?" Reuben crossed his arms. "I'm saying if Beverly thinks she can bully you with HOA rules, she doesn't know who she's dealing with. She just poked the wrong family." The room went quiet. For the first time since seeing the ruins of his cabin, Maurice felt something stir inside him. Resolve. But Maurice didn't yet realize that the fight ahead wouldn't just be about his cabin. It would expose something bigger. And Beverly Hensley was about to learn that some battles can't be won with threats and bulldozers. Before it was rubble on the ground, that cabin had been Maurice's dream. He didn't grow up with much. His parents lived paycheck to paycheck in Shreveport, raising 4 kids on a steel worker's wages. Maurice learned early that if you wanted something lasting, You had to put in the hours nobody else wanted. So he did. He took overtime shifts at the welding shop. He picked up side jobs repairing farm equipment. He kept a coffee can in his closet, where every spare 20 went straight toward one goal, a place by the lake. When he finally bought the plot on Caddo Lake 6 years ago, it was nothing but brush and mud. But Maurice saw more than weeds. He saw mornings with his son dropping a line off a dock, evenings with friends gathered on a porch, quiet Sundays when the world felt far away. Piece by piece, paycheck by paycheck, he turned that land into a home. His sister Adrienne remembered those early days well. She'd helped stain boards, holding nails in her teeth while Maurice hammered beams into place. "This isn't just a cabin," she told him once as they worked side by side. "It's your blood in these walls." Maurice grinned through sweat and said, "Exactly. That's why it'll last." But even in those first months, there had been tension with the HOA. Beverly Hensley ran the association with an iron grip, showing up to every meeting in pastel suits and pearls, her smile sharp enough to cut. She was the kind of person who quoted bylaws like scripture. Where most folks bought lake property for peace and relaxation, Beverly saw control. At the first HOA meeting Maurice attended, he raised his hand to ask about dock permits. Beverly gave him a long look before answering. "As long as your dues are current, Mr. Landry, you'll have no trouble." Something about the way she emphasized current made him pause. He let it slide then, but it stuck in the back of his mind. Over time, small frictions grew. Beverly sent letters about his grass being an inch too high. She complained when his nephew parked a boat trailer too close to the road. None of it was major, but it was constant, a drip of irritation that never stopped. Maurice tried to brush it off. "That's just Beverly," Franklin Dade once told him with a shrug. "She likes reminding people she's in charge." Still, Maurice kept every receipt, every statement, every letter tucked neatly in a folder. He wasn't about to let anyone accuse him of cutting corners. The real trouble started last year, when Beverly claimed his annual HOA payment hadn't been received. Maurice pulled out the bank record showing the check had cleared. He even highlighted the transaction. At the next meeting, he slid the paper across the table. "There it is, paid in full." Beverly barely glanced at it before pushing it back with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Clerical errors happen. Just be sure it doesn't happen again." Maurice's jaw tightened. "It didn't happen the first time." Whispers rippled around the room, but Beverly moved on, acting as if nothing had been said. After that, letters came more frequently. Warnings, notices, claims that his payments were late. Each time Maurice showed proof. Each time, Beverly brushed him off. By spring, it wasn't just Maurice noticing. Sherman from down the road pulled him aside one afternoon at the bait shop. "She's after you, Maurice. Don't know why, but it's plain as day. Keep your eyes open." Maurice chuckled bitterly. "She can't take what I've built, Sherman, not unless I let her." Sherman shook his head. "Don't underestimate her. Beverly always gets what she wants." Maurice dismissed it then, but Sherman's words would echo later, standing in front of the ruins of his cabin. But back then, Maurice still believed the system would protect him, that facts and proof would be enough. He had no idea Beverly was already planning her boldest move yet. The letters started out like ordinary HOA notices, polite wording, clipped sentences, and that tidy letterhead with Caddo Lake Estates Homeowners Association stamped across the top. At first glance, they didn't look threatening at all. But Maurice learned quickly that the tone behind Beverly Hensley's words was anything but polite. The first one came in April. It claimed his dues were late. Maurice spread the letter on his kitchen table, smoothing the paper with calloused hands. He pulled out his folder of records, flipped through, and there it was. Proof the check had cleared weeks earlier. He snapped a picture of the bank statement and mailed a copy back with a short note. "Paid in full. Please update your records." He figured that was the end of it. But a month later, another letter arrived. This one was less patient. "Second notice, your account remains delinquent. Immediate action required." Maurice's blood pressure rose as he read it aloud to his sister over the phone. "They're saying I haven't paid," he told Adrienne, Her voice came sharp and certain. "And you have the proof?" "Right here in my hand." "Then don't let them bully you, Maurice. You're not in the wrong," he sighed, rubbing his temple. "Feels like she's building a case, though. Like she wants me to slip up." Adrian's tone hardened. "Then don't give her the satisfaction." By midsummer, the letters turned into warnings. Beverly's signature at the bottom seemed bolder, the sentences sharper. Failure to comply will result in penalties, including but not limited to property liens and enforcement action. One evening, Maurice carried the latest letter to the HOA meeting at the lakeside clubhouse, the air conditioning blasted, but tension still hung thick. When his turn came to speak, he walked to the front with the paper in hand. He set it down on the table in front of Beverly. "This says I'm behind on fees." "I'm not. Here's the proof." He pulled a stapled set of statements from his folder and laid them out one by one. Beverly leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the papers without picking them up. Her smile was thin, the kind that looked polite but carried teeth. "Mistakes happen," she said smoothly. "Our records show delinquency. Perhaps you should double-check with your bank." Maurice's voice hardened. "I've already done that, more than once." A murmur spread through the room. Sherman, seated near the back, raised his voice. "I've known Maurice all my life. Man pays his bills. If he says he's square, I'd bet my last dollar on it." Beverly's eyes flicked to Sherman, then back to Maurice. "This isn't about reputation, it's about compliance. If your payments are late, consequences follow." Maurice's jaw tightened. "They're not late, and I won't sit back while you pretend otherwise." The meeting shifted on quickly, but the damage was done. Maurice left feeling the weight of every stare. Some neighbors looked at him with sympathy, others with doubt. Beverly had planted her seed that Maurice Landry was a problem. By September, the notices no longer sounded like warnings. They sounded like threats. Final notice: immediate payment required. Failure to comply will result in enforcement up to and including removal of non-compliant structures. Maurice read that last line over and over. Removal of non-compliant structures. He knew what it meant. That evening, he drove down the road to Franklin Dade's place. Franklin was sitting on his porch cleaning a shotgun when Maurice pulled up. "Frank, you've lived here longer than anyone," Maurice began. "These letters, they ever threaten to take somebody's house?" Franklin set the gun aside and frowned. "Never seen it go that far. Beverly likes to talk tough, but usually it's just fines and liens." "Why?" Maurice handed him the letter. Franklin read it, whistled low, and shook his head. "She's gunning for you. Don't let her." Maurice exhaled hard. "I don't plan to, but what if she means it?" Franklin looked him in the eye. "Then you better be ready, son. Beverly don't bluff." But Maurice still believed the system would step in, that the law would protect him. He had no idea Beverly was already planning the day she'd send bulldozers down his road. The weekend Maurice lost everything started like any other. He loaded his truck with tools and fishing gear, planning to head to Baton Rouge to visit his aunt. He locked the cabin, patted the porch rail out of habit, and drove away without a second thought. To him, that cabin was sturdy as the ground it stood on. By Monday afternoon, it was nothing but splinters. Neighbors later told him they saw the trucks rolling in around noon. A flatbed carried a yellow excavator, its engine growling as men in reflective vests unloaded it. A dump truck followed, along with a smaller crew cab stacked with sledgehammers and crowbars. "Looked like a professional job," Franklin recalled later. But nobody had ever seen a crew work so fast. Beverly Hensley was there too. She stood under a wide-brimmed hat, clipboard in hand, pearls glinting in the sun. Her presence made it official, at least in appearance. When Franklin walked down to ask what was happening, Beverly's answer was clipped. "Mr. Landry has failed to comply with association bylaws. This structure is subject to removal." Franklin tried to argue. "Beverly, he's paid. He showed the proof at the meeting." She smiled coolly. "Then he should have no problem proving it again. Now please stand back for your safety." And with that, the excavator tore through Maurice's front wall like it was cardboard. The porch collapsed in seconds. Glass shattered as the windows gave way. The swing Maurice built with his father crashed into the rubble, chains snapping with a metallic cry. Some neighbors gasped. Others watched silently, arms folded. A few even muttered that maybe Maurice should have kept up with his dues, but no one dared to stop it. By evening there was nothing left. The dump truck carried off most of the debris, leaving only a jagged mess of boards and nails. The dock, which had no reason to be touched, was smashed too, its posts ripped from the water and left floating downstream. When Maurice returned the next morning, the scene nearly dropped him to his knees. He stood in the dirt, eyes scanning the destruction, struggling to believe what he was seeing. He whispered to himself, "They really did it." His hands trembled as he picked up a shard of glass, recognizing it as part of the kitchen window where Renee used to bake pies when she visited. He saw a broken drawer handle, still attached to a splinter of wood. His father's old dresser, reduced to trash. The air smelled like wet sawdust and oil, the lingering scent of machines that had erased years of work in hours. Franklin appeared again, hat in hand, guilt etched across his face. "Maurice, I tried to stop her. I swear I did." She wouldn't listen. Maurice turned slowly. "You stood there and watched?" Franklin's voice faltered. What could I do? She had the paperwork. Crew said they were hired. If I'd stepped in, they'd have called the sheriff." Maurice's chest rose and fell with fury. "Paperwork? That was my home." A few other neighbors drifted over. Some offered quiet condolences. Others avoided his eyes. Maurice could tell who had sided with Beverly. Those who muttered about rules, about compliance, about how everybody has to play by the same system. He didn't argue. He just walked back to his truck, every step heavier than the last. That night, he sat on Adrian's couch in Shreveport, staring at the floor. His sister studied his face, her voice soft. "It's gone?" Maurice nodded once. Every board, every nail. Adrian's jaw tightened. "She had no right." Reuben leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You still got those letters?" Maurice pulled the folder from his bag and dropped it on the coffee table. "Every one of them. Proof I paid. Proof she ignored it." Reuben thumbed through the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. "She overstepped big time. This isn't civil anymore. It's criminal." Adrian's voice was low but firm. "Maurice, you built that cabin with your own hands. You don't just let someone take that from you. We're going to get answers." Maurice finally looked up, eyes burning with both grief and rage. "Then let's make sure she regrets this." But what Maurice didn't know yet was that Beverly's ambition had left more than just his cabin in ruins. It had left a trail of evidence that could bring her whole operation down. The days after the demolition felt like living inside a nightmare that refused to end. Maurice woke up at Adrian's house in Shreveport each morning with a moment of calm, only to remember that the cabin on Caddo Lake was nothing but wreckage. That realization hit like a hammer to the chest, every single day. He spent his first week driving back and forth between Shreveport and the lake. He sat in his truck staring at the ruins, sometimes for hours, trying to make sense of it. The sound of the wind through the broken beams was haunting. His fishing rods, once neatly stacked in the corner of the porch, now lay twisted in the dirt like broken bones. One afternoon, his neighbor Franklin met him there. Franklin kicked at the rubble with the toe of his boot. "It's hard to look at," he muttered. Maurice's voice was steady, though his eyes were red. "Hard to look at? This was my life, Frank. My father helped me put that roof on. My son learned to bait his first hook off that dock, and Beverly turned it into garbage." Franklin looked down, ashamed. "I'm sorry, Maurice. I should have done more." Maurice didn't answer. His silence said everything. Rumors swirled through the neighborhood. At the bait shop in Uncertain, two men whispered near the counter. "Beverly finally cleared that lot." "Cleared? She stole it. Maurice had all his payments in order." "Maybe, but folks say she's been eyeing that land for years. Prime spot, right on the bend." By the time word reached Maurice, the whispers were louder than the truth. People weren't just debating whether Beverly had the right. They were questioning Maurice's honesty. At the next HOA meeting, Beverly stood at the front of the room in a pale blue blazer, her voice crisp. The association acted within its rights. Mr. Landry failed to pay fees for 3 consecutive cycles, leaving us no choice but to enforce compliance. Maurice was there, standing at the back, fists clenched at his sides. He interrupted, his voice shaking with fury. "That's a lie, and you know it. I have every receipt, every statement. You ignored them." Beverly's smile was practiced, unshaken. "Then perhaps your bank failed you, but the board has moved on, and so should you." The room buzzed. Some nodded in agreement with Beverly. Others whispered to each other, unwilling to take sides. Maurice scanned the faces of people he'd waved to for years, people who had eaten at his table. Half wouldn't even meet his eyes. When the meeting ended, Sherman pulled him aside. "She's twisting it, Maurice, but you've got something she doesn't. Family in the right places." Maurice exhaled slowly. "I've never leaned on Adrian or Reuben for anything. I don't want them dragged into this mess." Sherman's gaze hardened. "Maurice, you don't have a cabin anymore. You've already been dragged in. Let your family help you drag her down with you." That night, back in Shreveport, Adrian set a cup of coffee in front of her brother. "I've been looking into Beverly," she said. "She's not just pushing you. She's been filing complaints on half the folks in that community, most of them too scared to fight back." Reuben leaned against the counter, arms folded. "We pulled a few strings, made some calls. You'd be surprised how sloppy her paper trail is. Contracts, inflated fees, unreported expenses. She's been running that HOA like her personal piggy bank." Maurice's jaw dropped. "So it wasn't just me?" Adrian shook her head. "You're not the first, Maurice. Just the first she thought she could erase completely." Reuben's voice was sharp. "She picked the wrong man to try it on, because now it's not just about a cabin. It's about corruption. And we've got the tools to prove it." Maurice sat back, staring at his siblings, torn between disbelief and relief. For the first time since the demolition, the weight on his chest eased. "Then let's go after her," he said quietly. But what Maurice didn't realize yet was that exposing Beverly wouldn't be simple, because the deeper they dug, the uglier her network of lies and intimidation would become. The night Maurice finally gave his blessing, the air in Adrian's living room shifted. It wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about justice. Adrian pulled out her laptop. Reuben set a thick notepad on the table, and Maurice sat between them, his calloused hands folded tight. Adrian spoke first. "We start with documentation. Maurice, you've already got receipts, statements, letters. That's our foundation. But if Beverly's been targeting other homeowners too, we need their stories." Maurice nodded, still stiff with anger. "Franklin told me she's fined him over weeds by his dock. Sherman said she hassled him about a fence that's been there since the 80s. She's been after everybody." Reuben scribbled notes. "That's intimidation through policy. Classic abuse of authority. But we can't just accuse. We need proof of a pattern. Contracts, financials, anything that shows she benefited from these so-called violations." Maurice leaned forward. "How do we get that?" Adrian gave a knowing look. "Public records requests, county filings. Sometimes folks like Beverly get sloppy when they think nobody's watching. If she used contractors to demolish your place, there should be a paper trail." Reuben tapped his pen. "And if she cut corners, or padded numbers, that's fraud." Maurice sat back, trying to take it in. "Feels like I'm way out of my league here." Adrian smiled faintly. "That's why you've got us." The next morning, they drove to Harrison County Courthouse in Marshall, Texas. Adrian and Reuben split up. She headed for records. He started talking to contacts he knew in the sheriff's office. Maurice trailed along, watching his sister sift through stacks of documents with the sharp focus of someone who lived for details. Hours later, Adrian slid a file across the table. "Look at this," she said. "The contract Beverly signed for your demolition, filed under emergency removal. That's not even a valid category for residential property. She made it up." Maurice's eyebrows shot up. "She just invented a reason?" Adrian nodded. "And billed the HOA triple the going rate? Guess who signed off on the payment? Beverly herself," Reuben returned with his own find. "One of the deputies remembers the crew being escorted by a security car. HOA funds covered it, which means she used association money for a private demolition without a court order." Maurice's chest tightened with both rage and relief. "So she really had no authority?" "None," Reuben confirmed. It was theft, straight up. That night, back at Adrian's, the three of them spread documents across the kitchen table. Receipts, contracts, bylaws highlighted in yellow. The evidence piled higher than coffee cups. Maurice rubbed his forehead. I just wanted peace on the lake. I never thought I'd be sitting here with my sister and cousin plotting against an HOA president. Adrian's tone was calm but fierce. This isn't plotting. It's holding her accountable. People like Beverly count on fear and silence. She thought you'd roll over. She thought you'd walk away. Reuben's voice was steel. But you didn't. And now she's got to answer for it. Later that week they visited neighbors. Franklin was first, still guilt-ridden about watching the demolition. I'll give you a statement, Franklin said firmly. Whatever you need. I saw her order that excavator to start. She never had a judge's order. I knew it then. I know it now. Sherman added his piece too. She fined me for trimming trees without her approval. Said it changed the character of the community. I still got the notice. Woman thinks she owns the lake. Each story added fuel. Each paper, each testimony painted the picture clearer. Beverly's power wasn't about maintaining order. It was about control and profit. One evening, as the three of them sat back after hours of sorting through files, Maurice finally allowed himself a half-smile. She thought she was the storm, but she's about to see what it's like when the tide turns. But Beverly wasn't about to roll over quietly, because just as the Landrys began piecing together her corruption, she was preparing her own moves to silence them. The deeper Adrian and Reuben dug, the more rot they uncovered. What started as a demolition without authority began to look like a carefully constructed racket. Beverly Hensley wasn't just enforcing HOA rules, she was twisting them, bending them, and, when necessary, inventing them. Maurice sat at Adrian's kitchen table night after night, staring at stacks of documents. His cabin was gone, but seeing the evidence pile up gave him a different kind of energy. Rage had settled into focus. Adrian pointed at a spreadsheet she had drawn up. Look here. Over the last 3 years, the HOA collected nearly double what their annual budget should require. Landscaping, road maintenance, dock repairs. Those are legitimate expenses. But these contractor fees? She tapped her pen on a line item. Way out of line. Maurice squinted at the numbers. 30 grand for mowing and brush clearing? You could hire 3 full-time groundskeepers for that. Reuben leaned back in his chair. And all of those contracts link back to one company, Hensley Property Services. Guess who owns it? Maurice didn't need to guess. His voice was flat. Her husband. Adrian's eyes were sharp. She's been funneling association money straight into her family's pocket. Your cabin wasn't the first to suffer, just the first she wiped off the map. Maurice clenched his fists. So this wasn't about fees. It was about money. She wanted me out so she could resell the lot. Reuben added, and she padded the demolition invoice 3 times over. We're talking fraud, wire fraud if any of it went through electronic transfers. That opens federal doors. Maurice looked between them, shaking his head slowly. All I wanted was peace. I didn't want a war, but she brought one to my doorstep. They decided to dig wider. Adrian called a handful of other homeowners in the community. One, a widow named Iris Kimball, broke down in tears on the phone. She fined me $2,000 for painting my shutters the wrong shade of green. Iris said it violated the aesthetic guidelines. I couldn't fight it. I just paid. I didn't want any trouble. Another neighbor, Kenneth Poirier, told them his dock was condemned without warning. She said it wasn't up to code, had a crew tear half of it down before I could even appeal. Then she fined me for leaving debris. Each call painted a picture of a woman who weaponized rules for her own gain. Adrian recorded every testimony, logging dates and details. Reuben started contacting federal colleagues discreetly, testing the waters for potential charges. Maurice couldn't hide his disbelief. How long's she been running this scam? Reuben shrugged. At least a decade. Probably longer. Folks don't fight back because it costs too much, or they're scared. But you've got nothing left for her to take. That makes you dangerous to her. That danger became clear one evening when Maurice returned to his truck after buying supplies. A slip of paper was tucked under the wiper. In block letters it read, "Quit while you can." He carried it inside and dropped it on Adrian's table. Looks like she knows I'm not rolling over. Reuben studied the note, then crumpled it in his fist. That's intimidation. Classic move, but it means she's nervous. Adrian's expression hardened. Which means we're getting close. Maurice leaned forward, voice low. So what's the next step? Adrian's answer was immediate. We confront her, not in anger, not in public, but face to face with the evidence. Let her know she's not untouchable anymore. Maurice hesitated. And if she doesn't back down? Reuben's voice was cold steel. Then we take her apart in court, and maybe further if the feds bite. Maurice sat back, letting the words sink in. The fear was still there, but beneath it was something stronger. Determination. But Beverly Hensley wasn't the kind of woman to be cornered quietly, and when Adrian finally confronted her, the entire community would hear the clash. Adrian didn't believe in half measures. If Beverly Hensley was going to be confronted, it needed to be done where the truth couldn't be buried under whispers or private threats. That meant one place, the HOA meeting at the Lakeside Clubhouse. Maurice was reluctant. You sure about this? Those meetings are her turf. Adrian slid a folder across the table. Exactly, which is why we'll flip it on her. People need to see the truth with their own eyes. Reuben cracked his knuckles. And I'll be there, just in case she tries anything cute. The following Tuesday evening, the clubhouse buzzed with chatter as neighbors shuffled in, some carrying folding chairs when the rows filled up. Everyone had heard about Maurice's cabin by now. Some came out of curiosity, others out of loyalty to Beverly, and a few because they were tired of living in fear of her notices. Beverly swept in last, pearls gleaming, pastel suit crisp, clipboard clutched like a gavel. She took her place at the front, voice calm and commanding. We'll begin tonight with budget updates, then community concerns. Adrian rose from her seat before Beverly could launch into her numbers. I have a concern, she said loudly, her voice cutting through the room. Dozens of eyes shifted. Beverly's smile tightened. Concerns must be submitted in writing prior to meetings, Mrs. Landry Cole, Adrian said firmly. And this isn't a suggestion about lawn care. This is about fraud, intimidation, and the unlawful demolition of my brother's property. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maurice sat stiffly behind her, every muscle coiled. Beverly kept her composure. Your brother failed to pay his fees. The board acted within its rights. Adrian opened the folder and held up a stack of bank statements. Paid, every year, on time, cleared checks, stamped records. You ignored them. She handed copies to neighbors in the front row. Murmurs began. Beverly's smile faltered. Clerical errors are regrettable, but they don't change the fact. Reuben stood now, his voice heavy with authority. They don't change the fact that you billed triple the market rate for that demolition, signed off on your own contract, and funneled HOA money into your husband's company. I've seen the filings myself. The room erupted. Is that true? She can't do that. My doc fines went to her too. Beverly slammed her clipboard on the table. Order! This is slander! Baseless accusations from outsiders! Adrian's tone cut through the chaos. Baseless? We've spoken with at least 6 homeowners who've been fined or threatened under false pretenses. We have their notices. We have their testimonies. You've built a kingdom on fear, Mrs. Hensley, and it ends tonight. Maurice finally spoke, his voice low, but carrying across the room. You took my home. Not because of fees, but because you wanted that land. You thought I'd stay quiet. You were wrong. The silence that followed was thick. Even Beverly couldn't mask the shift in the room. Franklin Dade stood up from the back. I saw her give the order to the crew myself. No court papers, just her word. I'll swear to it. Then Iris Kimball, frail but determined, raised her hand. She fined me $2,000 for shutters. I paid because I was scared. I've kept the letter. One by one, voices rose, stories spilled, and the tide turned. Beverly tried to regain control. These claims are exaggerated. You all signed the bylaws when you bought your properties. But bylaws don't make you a queen. Sherman barked from the aisle. We trusted you to represent us, not rob us. The meeting dissolved into shouting. Some neighbors crowded around Adrian, asking what could be done. Others pointed fingers at Beverly, demanding refunds, demanding resignations. Through it all, Beverly's mask cracked. Her smile disappeared. Her eyes darted as if calculating her next move. For the first time, she wasn't in control. Adrian closed the folder, her voice steady. We'll be taking this evidence to the district attorney's office. If anyone else has been wronged, now is the time to step forward. The more we have, the stronger the case. Maurice stood beside her, his hand resting on the back of her chair. I've already lost my cabin, but I'm not losing my voice. Neither should any of you. The room went quiet, neighbors absorbing the weight of his words. Beverly snatched up her clipboard and stormed toward the door. This isn't over, she spat. Reuben's calm reply followed her out. No, it's just beginning. But while the community rallied, Beverly still had influence and money, and the fight was about to shift from the clubhouse to the courthouse, where every dirty detail would come under the spotlight. The morning after the HOA meeting, Maurice sat at Adrienne's kitchen table, staring at the mountain of papers spread before him. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel alone. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now called, offering their own letters, notices, and bank records. The folder of evidence grew so thick it barely closed. Adrienne set her coffee cup down and leaned across the table. This isn't just about your cabin anymore, Maurice. We've got enough here to expose a pattern of fraud. Reuben added, and with the witnesses lining up, Beverly's hold on that community is cracking. But this is the point where she'll fight dirtiest. You ready for that? Maurice's voice was steady. I've already lost everything I built. There's nothing left for her to take from me. So yeah, I'm ready. Later that week, Adrienne and Reuben met with the Harrison County District Attorney in Marshall. The DA, Clarence Odom, was a sharp man with thinning hair and a reputation for being tough on white-collar cases. He flipped through the documents, his brow rising higher with every page. Triple billing, self-signed contracts, unapproved demolitions. He set the folder down and looked at Maurice. Mr. Landry, this isn't an HOA dispute. This is fraud, plain and simple. If half of this holds up in court, Mrs. Hensley is in serious trouble. Maurice clenched his fists in his lap. So what happens now? Odom leaned back. We'll subpoena her records officially. If she refuses, we'll escalate. But I'll be honest, cases like this get messy. HOA boards often circle the wagons to protect themselves. You need to be prepared for her to spin this as a witch hunt. Adrienne cut in. She's already tried, but neighbors are talking. We've got statements, recordings, documents. She can't silence everyone. The DA nodded. Good. Keep gathering. The more voices, the stronger our case. Word of the investigation spread fast. Local papers picked up the story, framing it as a clash between a small-town HOA and a family unwilling to bow. Reporters showed up at the lake, snapping photos of the empty lot where Maurice's cabin once stood. One headline read, Cabin demolished in HOA dispute. Was it legal? Beverly didn't sit quietly. She hired an attorney, Douglas Frey, a polished man from Dallas who specialized in damage control. Within days, Frey issued a statement. The HOA acted in accordance with its bylaws. Mr. Landry's accusations are baseless and fueled by family connections, attempting to weaponize federal authority against a lawful community board. Maurice read the statement aloud on Adrienne's porch, shaking his head. Baseless? They leveled my home. How's that baseless? Reuben folded his arms. That's how people like him work, make you look like the aggressor. But Frey just told us their defense. We can cut through it. Meanwhile, neighbors once too afraid to speak began showing up with their own horror stories. A retired couple fined for a garden shed that had stood for 20 years. A young family billed thousands for dock maintenance that was never performed. Each story widened the scope, strengthening the case. But Beverly still had allies. A handful of board members doubled down, sending out community letters claiming Maurice and his family were destabilizing the neighborhood. Some neighbors stopped speaking to him, fearful of picking a side. Maurice confided to Adrienne one night, his voice low. Feels like I'm fighting two wars. One in court, one in my own neighborhood. She touched his hand. The truth will win. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will. The real turning point came when Reuben tracked down the demolition contractor. At first, the man was reluctant, but with quiet persistence, Reuben got him talking. She told us it was an emergency order, the contractor admitted. Said the structure was condemned. We didn't ask questions. She waived the paperwork, but we never saw a judge's signature. Reuben pressed. Would you be willing to put that in writing? The man hesitated, then nodded slowly. If it comes to it, yeah. I don't want to be tied to this mess. That testimony was gold. Adrian presented it to the DA, who immediately moved to expand the case. By early fall, subpoenas were issued. Beverly was forced to hand over financial records, and cracks widened. Payments funneled into shell accounts. HOA funds used for personal vacations. It was bigger than anyone had guessed. Maurice sat with Adrian and Reuben on the porch one evening, the cicadas loud in the trees. All I wanted was to fish off my dock, he said quietly. Now it feels like we're taking down an empire. Reuben answered without hesitation. Sometimes justice looks like that. One small fight exposing something much bigger. But while the legal heat closed in, Maurice knew the real closure wasn't in the courtroom. It would come when Beverly finally faced the community without her mask of power. The hearing drew a crowd bigger than any HOA meeting ever had. The county courthouse in Marshall buzzed with neighbors, reporters, and onlookers, all hungry to see what would happen when Beverly Hensley, once untouchable queen of Caddo Lake estates, finally sat at the defendant's table. Maurice walked in flanked by Adrian and Reuben. His calloused hands tugged nervously at the brim of his hat, but there was no backing out now. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. Every person wronged by Beverly's petty fines and fraudulent schemes was depending on him. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The DA laid out the evidence piece by piece, bank records showing inflated contracts, receipts proving double billing, testimonies from neighbors who had been bullied into paying bogus fees. Then came the demolition order. Adrian took the stand, presenting copies of Maurice's cleared payments and explaining how Beverly ignored them. Mrs. Hensley claimed Mr. Landry was delinquent, Adrian said firmly. But the proof is here. He paid on time every time. She demolished his home not because of fees, but because she wanted the land. Gasps echoed in the gallery. Beverly's lawyer tried to spin it. Clerical errors are unfortunate but hardly criminal. My client acted within her authority to preserve community standards. Reuben, called as a witness, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence as a federal marshal carried weight. I've reviewed the contracts personally. Mrs. Hensley signed off on payments directly to her husband's company. That's not a clerical error. That's corruption. The contractor's testimony sealed it. Under oath, he admitted Beverly had pressured his crew to demolish Maurice's cabin without court authorization. She said it was condemned. We trusted her word. But looking back, we were used. When the gavel finally came down, Beverly's mask cracked. The judge ruled against her, citing fraud, abuse of power, and unlawful demolition. She was removed from her position, fined heavily, and referred for criminal investigation. Her allies on the board scrambled to distance themselves. Neighbors who once avoided Maurice now shook his hand outside the courthouse. Franklin clapped him on the back. Sherman grinned through tears. Even Iris Kimball hugged him, whispering, "You gave us our voices back." But for Maurice, the victory was complicated. He drove back to Caddo Lake that evening, parked by the empty lot where his cabin once stood, and sat quietly. The water lapped gently against the shore, reflecting the pinks and oranges of sunset. The land was bare, scarred by the demolition. But in his mind he saw the porch swing, the dock, his father's laughter, his son holding a fishing pole too big for his hands. Adrian joined him, standing beside the truck. "You did it, Maurice. You took her down." Maurice's eyes stayed on the water. "Cabin's still gone." Reuben walked up, resting a hand on his cousin's shoulder. "True, but your dignity isn't. That's what she wanted to take most. And she failed." Maurice let the words settle. Slowly he nodded. "Guess the lesson is, if you don't stand up, they'll run you over. But if you do, they can't erase you." Adrian smiled softly. "Exactly. You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for everyone she tried to silence." For the first time in weeks, Maurice breathed easy. The pain of losing his cabin would never vanish, but he'd gained something deeper, proof that even when the odds are stacked, one voice, backed by truth and persistence, can topple someone who abuses power. As the sun dipped below the trees, he whispered almost to himself, "She thought I'd walk away. But I didn't." The quiet strength in his words carried the weight of every sleepless night, every receipt he'd saved, every insult he'd endured. And maybe that was the true moral of Maurice Landry's story. Buildings can be torn down, but resolve can't. If you're listening to this, remember, you don't have to accept being pushed aside. You don't have to let intimidation win. Sometimes standing your ground is the strongest act of all. So if this story spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Stand tall, speak loud, and never let anyone bulldoze your dignity.